Welcome to the second video in this arpeggio series. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how to use the arpeggios that we covered in the last video. So as a quick recap, we talked about the different ways to visualize the arpeggios on the bass and the different ways to play those arpeggios physically, and then how to use those different patterns to play them all over the bass. So for example, just as a quick recap, pattern number 1, pattern number 2, pattern number 3. And you can use those anywhere. So let's go to the D, pattern number 1, pattern number 2, pattern number 3. And the more you do that, the more you'll get a sense of, or a stronger sense of that sound, the sound of that major arpeggio, which will help develop your oral ability as well, as an added bonus. So, using arpeggios. In this video, I'm going to talk about using them from a bass playing perspective, and then in the next video, I'll talk about using them in a more improvisational setting. So, even though all of these notes sound great with their chord, they sound great in different ways, which is very important, because they're not all the same. They don't all have the same effect. Even though they all sound good, like I said in the last video, they have subtly different effects, especially as a bass player. This also translates to playing them on the piano if you want to mess around with some different bass notes, or even on the guitar, because sometimes we have these beautiful chords on the guitar that are created by playing your favorite open chord and then chucking a different bass note below. So let's go back to our favorite G major chord, people's chord, as I think I said in the first video. So when we play the root note of the chord on the bass, that's a super stable sound. We're really just agreeing with the chord. So if you have a guitarist or a pianist who's playing a chord and you're playing the root note, you're essentially just saying, "Yep, I totally agree," and you're really just reinforcing the sound of that chord. And that's why, as the stereotype goes, bass players often play the root notes, because they really just reinforce what's already happening in the band. The next note, the third, so in this case the B, has a really beautiful sound. It has a really interesting effect. And again, I should preface this before I go into the more, abstract part of this video, that this is subjective. So I'm going to give you my interpretations of these sounds. And you might have similar interpretations, but there's no correct interpretation necessarily. Part of the joy of this whole process is developing your own relationships with these sounds. So, back to the third. To me, when you have the third of the chord in the bass, you're saying, I agree with what's going on, but the real moment of interest is coming up in a moment. So it has a momentum. It creates a sense of momentum. It's saying to the listener, this is cool, but pay attention to what's coming up in a second. So a couple of different ways you could use that sound, or at least this is a couple of different ways that I think of using that sound. You might use it if you have one chord that's going for an extended period of time. Let's say even just 2 bars, you might play your root note, and then the second bar, you play the third, which is saying we're going somewhere. Even if you're a bit sneaky and you go back to the root note, or in that case I went to the root note but an octave up. To me, even if you do that, it's telling the listener, just for that moment when you're playing the third, that the real interesting moment is coming up in a second. That's one way you can use it. Another way you can use it is if you want to, if the band is landing on a chord either at the start of the section or in the middle of a section, and you want that chord to feel like it's not fully settled, like we're still, like I said before, the important chord is coming up next, then you might have a situation where, let's say you're playing your G and you've got your root note, and then the next chord is let's say an F, but you play an A in the bass, which is the third of the F chord. Then what you're really saying is, I hear the F, but don't pay attention too much to this chord, because the next thing is going to be even cooler. All right. The third option we have is the fifth. So that's playing a D in the bass underneath a G chord. And this is an incredible sound when used in the right situation. What the fifth says to me is that you're saying, yes, I agree with the sound that the piano is playing or the guitar is playing, but I don't want to resolve it just yet. So as the bass player, you can sort of hold up the rest of the band and say, okay, we're not done, and we're done when I decide to play the root note, because it has this real floating feel to it, and then it resolves when you have that nice stable root note again. So a couple of ways you can use that sound is if you have a section that is, you want to build some tension, or you want to really emphasize that where the resolution is coming up in 4 or 8 bars or 12 bars or whatever it may be, you can just hang on the fifth, even if it's the tonic chord of the piece. And by that I mean, even if your song is in G and the band's playing a G, but you want it to feel like we're not home yet, it's not fully resolved, then you can play that fifth, which is a D. So that might sound like, let's say you got a G, you go to the C with the band, go to the 5 chord, which is going to resolve to the 1, supposedly. It just delays that resolution a little bit. Another way that you can use it, which is a little bit cheeky as a bassist, but can be incredibly effective if done in the right at the right time, is holding the fifth of the home chord or the tonic chord, let's say the G major in this situation, holding the fifth while an entire chord progression is going by. So for example, if we take that basic sort of pop progression that I played before, let's say you go around once and you're playing the root notes with each chord, and then the next time it goes around you just play the fifth, so the D, on every chord. They can keep going around as a band, but it won't feel fully resolved until you play that G at the end. That might have been a better demonstration if I had an actual band with me, but there you go. I apologize. So that's a bit of an insight into some of the different ways you can use these arpeggio notes as a bass player, or even in your compositions. In the next video, I'm going to talk about how to use them in a more improvisational way. But hopefully that is of interest, and hopefully you learned something, and I'll see you in the next video.